My great pleasure to introduce a very special guest in the studio, Dr. Peter Boghossian. He's a distinguished philosopher and academic. He focuses particularly on the topic of critical thinking and moral reasoning. He's written some books and some articles. He's got a wonderful story to tell as well. Peter, kia ora, thanks. Welcome to the program.
Well,
thanks for joining us.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you so much.
What's your story so far? What's led you to the place you're at? I mean, the short version, Peter.
The short version, let's see. My grandparents are immigrants to the United States, and I just bottom line it, I did my dissertations in the prisons. I'm fascinated by how people reason and think about problems, and I had a job at a university teaching. I had continuous employment, which was a job for life, basically.
Yep.
And it became overrun by wokeism and critical social justice. And I published a bunch of fake papers to try to expose the corruption in scholarship. And I submitted a letter of resignation, which was shockingly really received a tremendous number of downloads.
Yeah.
I resigned my position. I run a small nonprofit. I'm associated with the University of Austin. Now I go around the world and talk to people about how to have productive conversations and how to engage ideas, and I just love my life. My life is truly phenomenal.
And hey, in New Zealand as a guest of the Free Speech Union.
I was just going to say that I was in New Zealand with the guests of the Free Speech Union who've been fantastic, and I'm giving a talk tonight. I have a bunch of talks in which tonight actually is my talk. I'm going to defend ideas in which I don't believe. Okay. So I'm going to defend ideas around critical social justice and wokeism, and I think that they're total nonsense.
What is it about critical wokeism? I mean, some people would call it wokeism. Other people would describe it as critical social justice.
Yeah, they're the same.
What is your beef with that? What do you think is difficult or dangerous about that
I think
particular
we only have
ideology?
45 minutes.
Well, okay. The brief version again.
It's divisive. It teaches people not to listen. It forwards conclusions that are demonstrably false. For example, racism is the ordinary and everyday state of affairs, or you can be born in the wrong body, particularly with children. It's the minor issue with children. I don't know, in the United States, it's 18.
Yep. So
hormones and sex surgeries for kids, that every disparity in outcome is due to systems. I think that's demonstrably false. Culture plays a major role in that. So it's just a very toxic, very dangerous, and very divisive ideology.
For some people, we're still getting our head around this because it seems like a very new phenomenon which has taken hold in our culture quite strongly. What do you think is behind this current cultural movement?
Oh, I can tell you exactly what's behind. That's the easiest. It's a softball question. I am very sorry to report, and I truly get no joy in saying this to you. It is a neo-colonial export. So my country is exporting that around the world. And the origin of that, the genesis, is in the university system. So it starts in the university system. It's percolating there. It's for years. And then we export it around the world. And then this is where we are.
Yeah. As we mentioned, in New Zealand as a guest of the Free Speech Union, why do you think this is so bad for free speech and reasoned debate?
What, the wokeism?
Wokeism, yeah.
That's interesting. I'll answer the question, but I don't think it's the best question to ask.
Okay.
I don't think it's the right question, but I'm happy to answer the question. And no, I didn't mean it. No offense by that.
Yeah.
I think it's bad because look, you and I obviously have substantive disagreements. I'm an atheist. You're a Christian. Mm-hmm. I'm fine. I'm sitting here talking to you. We're cool. Actually, I think Nathan from the Free Speech Union is a Christian.
Yep.
I'm fine. He's sponsoring a tour for me. When in civilized societies, if you have disagreements with someone, you air those disagreements. You have a conversation about them so it doesn't devolve into violence and nastiness. And so I think that there's a dishonesty about platforming. Oh, we don't want to listen to this person. We can't hear this person. I think it's really dangerous because it forwards certain conclusions that have disabled the means of error correction. That's one of the things I'm going to talk about tonight. So one of the reasons that free speech is so important is because it allows us to correct mistakes in our reasoning, and critical social justice or wokeism shuts off that capacity. And not only does it shut off that capacity in terms of our institutions, but in terms of our own relationships. Like, oh, we can't talk to him. He doesn't have 100% convergence in what we believe. Well, who cares if the guy doesn't have 100% convergence in what it's totally irrelevant. In fact, what did Christopher Hitchens say? There's nothing worse than being boring. Imagine your life if you only hung out with people who agree with you. Well, that's the situation in which many people find themselves, and many of those people are on college campuses. Your life would just be much richer and more interesting if you surround yourself with people with whom you disagree. Plus, the other thing is, like, think about the arrogance that, especially as a young person, that everything you think is right. Like, really? Like, every belief you have, you're 25, and it's all true.
Yeah.
It's insane. It's completely insane. Anybody who would think about that for like 5 minutes could see that.
You mentioned Christopher Hitchens, and there's a view that to a certain extent the new atheists have created this cultural phenomenon because this is something which has risen up to fill the social cohesion gap left by the demise of Christianity. What's your view on that?
That's called the substitution hypothesis. And you ever watch Game of Thrones?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, good. So, good, then you're not dead to me. So, in the Game of Thrones, the only reason that you have the new gods is because people stop believing in the old gods, so that's why they had the new gods. So, the substitution hypothesis is basically the idea when the Abrahamic traditions fell, that something substituted that. So, kind of belief in the supernatural is a default. And if you didn't have Christianity or Islam or less so Judaism, but that something would fill that gap. And so the question is, was New Atheism so successful in its attack on particularly Christianity that it caused not only a schism and a rupture, but it caused a space, a liminal space where other beliefs that are also unevidenced could thrive and flourish in that period? And that's the basic idea of the substitution hypothesis.
Is it one you subscribe to? Do you think it's got merit?
It's a really good question. I don't know. I think it has some merit. I had a conversation with Richard Dawkins about this. He said he doesn't think it's true. I don't know if it's true. I think it's a very complicated problem that you'd have to look to intellectual history because we have a kind of myopia about this society that we're in our own culture. I don't know if it's true or not.
One, I suppose, aspect looking at social cohesion and the sense of belonging, and just sort of pushing into that sort of space or into that question. Some people would say, well, with the demise of Christianity and people regular meeting together and going, hey, this is my tribe, this is where I feel I belong, I've got this belief system that supports how I feel, that is really what has allowed this to thrive. It's not so much the faith, but that sense of belonging and social cohesion that comes with people who have a regular faith.
Yeah, I think that's right. People have made alternative communities or new communities. It's exacerbated by social media. Yeah. Likes, clicks, hits, views. And the only thing that people want more than, or one of the few things that people want more than to not be wrong, is to belong. Yeah. And to be loved and to be respected and to have the approbation of other people. And so we have communities that have come together now. And I can understand the genesis of a lot of those communities. You know, we've been very unjust to gay people. I say we, the collective West. Yep. We've been very unjust to people in society. So I can understand how those individuals would want to form new communities, or even the people who are economically impoverished, that they don't have a sense of that they had a possibility to achieve just because they were born in a poor zip code or their father was an alcoholic or what have you. And so I understand the disappointment in society, and I understand the fact that they genuinely have been wronged. But the answer to that is not to go to crazy town, right? The answer to that is to not try to rectify those wrongs by creating systems that, again, perpetrate injustices against other people.
But, hey, in that situation, it's easy to see that why they might think that they have been victimized by a society, that they're in a situation not through their own choices, but through circumstances and culture and systems. You can understand their anger and looking for somebody to blame, perhaps.
Yeah, and what's interesting in the last few years is we've turned that victim narrative into a badge of honor. So it's a good thing if you're a victim. Jonathan Haidt, the sociologist from NYU, talks about this, writes about this very extensively. And so there's nothing noble about being a victim. You shouldn't want to be a victim. You should want to But yet also there are actually some people who are victims.
Yeah.
And so we need to be honest about that. We also need to make discerning judgments about certain people. Again, I would argue that this is primarily on economic lines. Maybe you consider that to be old left, but people increasingly say that that's along racial lines or gender lines or quote unquote trans lines.
But if we're a victim, it's not our fault. We've got somebody else to blame. That in itself could be attractive of people that perhaps don't want to take responsibility.
Well, that's a large part of it, and this, I think everybody will be up with the conversation now, but I'll throw some wrenches into the, if I may.
Yep.
So I think you have a lot of people who are resentful that they're not as successful as they think that they should be, and the consequence of that is they found an ideology that they can latch onto and blame systems, and so the idea again that every disparity in outcome is due to systems as opposed to culture or as opposed to hard work or as opposed to, I don't know, maybe you just have a high IQ or something. You're just born more intelligent, or maybe you're just born more attractive. I don't know. But the idea that there's an easy boogeyman out there, and as a consequence of that, we have to just, do really crazy things like rip down the whole system but by and large, we're facing a rather unprecedented time, particularly in the West, and it should be deeply concerning to all of us.
Yeah. In that sense for belonging and purpose, though, instead of finding that within community, within perhaps some of the social structures such as the church, people go looking for that in internet chat rooms, in the echo chamber of social media platforms. That this is a wonderful space for these ideas and ideologies to grow.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear. I don't think there's anything wrong at all with being in an internet chat room or finding communities or finding friendships. I do jiu-jitsu very seriously. I become friends. I go do it all around the world. I have my, literally 40% of my gear is my jiu-jitsu gear. There's something actually lovely about that. But those relationships they're based upon, Aristotle writes about this. They're based upon a love of a common activity. And so he talks about layers of friendship. And so above that would be you like to have conversation, I like to have conversation, you like to have conversation, that would be, and then the highest form of friendship would be like, he calls it virtue friendship. So people who are both virtuous those kinds of relationships took me a long time to actually truly grok or truly understand at a deep level what that meant. So there's nothing wrong with the sense of wanting to belong. The problem is that when you want to belong and you other people, that's kind of what a sense of belonging is that those who don't belong, we have to other them.
It just gets very tribal very quickly.
And it's not merely that they're wrong, but it's that they're bad people. They're going to go to hell or something is going to happen to them. But that's built into our evolutionary moral intuitions.
We've seen that at quite a heated level in the US recently, of course, with the recent presidential elections. I imagine it's been a pretty rough Thanksgiving in some households.
Yeah, it has. I I haven't been in the United States for I was just very, very briefly there, but I haven't stayed there for a while. I've been traveling for my nonprofit. And that's the thing that's really disheartening is that, and I, as much as I try to make this not about a right-left divide, I'm not even sure those are useful concepts anymore.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's better to do it issue by issue, though it takes more time to do that. I do think that the main tribalism is coming from one side, and if you don't agree with everything we say, then you're just a demon. You have to have a kind of convergence on moral opinions, on trans status, anything with an identity level salience.
We're talking about how maybe social media has kind of raised the temperature in terms of this sense of belonging.
Totally.
Do you think the COVID lockdowns also contributed to this, the isolation that came from that, the hunger for the sense of belonging? Is this a factor in what's been happening socially, do you think?
I do. I think I'm probably the wrong person to ask about that because I don't really have expertise in that, but it would seem to be obvious that kind of isolation, people went into hyperdrive for their sense of community. But I really am the wrong person to talk about that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Back to Game of Thrones reference,
and
I love that. Talking about how the new gods have replaced the old gods. If woke culture are the new gods, Are they better or worse than the old gods, in your opinion?
That's interesting. I had mentioned briefly to you off air, I'm an atheist, and without question, I have some extremely close friends now who are Christians, like actual Christians, you have a lot of people who pretend to be Christians. Yeah. so I can tell by your look, you know exactly what I mean.
Exactly, yeah.
Exactly what I mean.
There's a cultural thing, and then there's the, hey, no, I live my life by these principles.
That's exactly 100% correct. Yeah. Yes, that's right. So, most of my supporters at this point are Christians, and I have more in common by far with Christians, people who want to basically preserve Western civilization. They want to throw the whole society into the trash bin. They're not obsessed with race and gender than I do with many atheists. I mean, I would say most atheists are woke, or have been, as Elon Musk and I have said for years, have been infected by the woke mind virus. And so once that happens, that's kind of colonized your cognitions about things. It makes it very difficult to think clearly. And whether or not you think there's, an atheist is, in my first book I wrote, atheist is just someone who believes there's insufficient evidence to believe in God, but if they were given the evidence, they would believe. That's how I classify myself. Mm-hmm. So there's not really any atheist belief system as perfectly evidenced by this culture war.
Yeah.
Right? So I published a paper a while back where I called that the Great Realignment. And the Great Realignment, the idea is that some atheists and some Christians have more in common than atheists have with each other, or that Christians have with each other.
Wow.
It's a realignment. And so anybody who doesn't see that is caught in Cultural 1.0. And Cultural 1.0 is like, should evolution be taught in schools or things like that? We're way beyond. Like another example, J.K. Rowling, Cultural 1.0, They hated her, magic, what have you. And I'm certainly not talking about all Christians, probably the more fringe or...
some people hated and burned her books,
but or people who look to Paul more than the Synoptic Gospels or something. But now I think in the new culture war, you see the division of people who love her or people who hate her, which is very, very different. It's just a very different way to think about how the society unfolds. I mean, look, does it really matter if a guy walked on water? I mean, ultimately, it doesn't matter, right? What matters is, are you kind to people? What kind of society that you want to have? How do you live your life? Your metaphysical beliefs are largely irrelevant in this culture war.
Would you say that the woke culture has become taken on religious characteristics or even cultish characteristics?
There's no question about it. I've written about that. James Lindsay and I published a piece in, I think, 2013, Privilege is the Original Sin. People have written about that extensively. John McWhorter, Glenn Lowry have written about that, less so Glenn. But there's no question that's been the case. It has adopted characteristics, cult-like characteristics. They don't have the same metaphysical structure, and they don't have exactly the same kind of God-like structure, but they have, belief mechanisms in place to prevent beliefs from being dislodged, like blasphemy or heresy. So there are certainly parallels in the structures.
Perhaps parallels to more of a medieval Christian structure than any.
Yeah, I mean, these are certainly not people who believe in redemption.
Yeah.
So your sexual orientation, the color of your skin make you irredeemable. Mm-hmm. So I mean, these are really not.
And that perhaps one of the big difference between the old gods and the new gods is with Christianity, with faith, with the with those types of religions, there is a path of redemption. There is hey, things are bad, but they can get better. Whereas not so much with the new religions.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just in Budapest, and Rod Dreher is a good friend of mine. He's Live Not by Lies, best-selling Christian author. I don't have to hide. He knows I'm an atheist. I know he's an actual believer. Like, he's a true Christian. Like, if I could say one guy was a true, like, he would be a true Christian. And I think that there's just something extraordinary that we've lost in our relationships, in our friendships, in the ways that we engage with people. And we have a new moral orthodoxy that's arisen, that's told us. In fact, I just had a conversation with someone the other day who's somewhat estranged from his daughter because he has certain beliefs about the Maori.
Yeah.
Give me a freaking... Are you out of your mind? You're going to be estranged from your daughter because you have issues about Maori science? really? Like that's what you're on your deathbed about? And the criticism wasn't a criticism of him, but that's the kind of divisive, toxic nature of the ideology, is that's what cults do. You mentioned cults. It's like it separates people from their families. It separates people from their friends. It tells you cannot be friends with these people. So again, I'm not a Christian. You're probably the wrong person to ask, but what did Jesus do? Who was he hanging out with?
Yeah. Exactly. The underdogs, the unlikables. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's belief these people, I can assure you. That's why it's also problematic, because they won't talk to you. So, and that's the free speech element again. They have really cut themselves off in the most profound of ways to dislodging any false belief that they may have. It's just an extraordinary cultural moment when you really stop to think about how many people are in sway to that ideology and how it's captured our institutions wholesale. I mean, it's really extraordinary.
Yeah. Some people would say that atheism is also a religion, that it has a belief system, that there are people who are components to it, there are people who are advocates for it. One of the books that you've written is almost like a how-to guide for atheism evangelism in some ways. What would your thoughts on that be? Is atheism a type of faith?
No. Oh gosh, interesting. You switched the words from religion to faith. No, atheism absolutely not a type of faith. But I used to be pretty adamant that atheism was not a religion. And then I think I've had some changes of I've thought through this a lot, again empirically from what I've seen, and I've seen atheists who really act like fundamentalists.
Yeah,
they really have a kind of imperviousness to evidence, and not only an unwillingness to listen, but absolutely will not listen. In fact, that's one of the reasons I wrote my first book. I just don't think that there's sufficient evidence. Look, I wasn't gay. I have no axe to grind against any of this stuff, and I never was persecuted. I just don't think there's enough evidence to believe any of this stuff. Like, I don't think a guy walked on water. I just think it's silly. But because I think that, well, nothing else is entailed by that. Like, I'm not, I mean, so what? Someone thinks that. So, but I do think that there are many atheists who are just, rah-rah, in a way that I don't think is epistemically honest. Like, I think that the posture in that situation should be, what's the evidence?
I'm interested that you say that, because one of your books, and hey, I haven't read the book, I've just read the title.
That's fine.
There's journalism.
Yeah.
But a manual for creating atheists.
Correct.
That sounds quite evangelistic. It sounds like you're on a crusade, you're handing out tracts, you've got a bullhorn, all that type of stuff. That's not what the book's about.
Well, no, it is. Well, it's yes and no. So I originally wanted to title it A Street Epistemology, but my publisher told me that if you put the word epistemology in the book, no one in their right mind is going to buy it. He's probably right. But it's basically, and then that it's morphed. There are literally thousands of people all around the world who do street epistemology. Yep. And we're going to do some here in Auckland. But it's basically a way of using Socratic questions. It's like the Socratic method is a skeleton, and then I've added flesh to that from various domains of literature and various lines of thought. But the idea is that, can a belief be? Okay, let me actually reverse real quick. Yep. So one should never extend the confidence in a belief beyond the warrant of the evidence. And so, when you ask people what their evidence for example, I don't know, did Muhammad fly to heaven on a winged horse or something? So it doesn't have to be, it could be actually anything Judaism, it doesn't matter what it is, out of the Abrahamic traditions. We should always try to proportion our beliefs to the evidence, so that the book was a way that can be used. It was specifically in the context of atheism. But it's really interesting how people have responded to that. And, as I told you, I run a small nonprofit. And one of my donors, my major donors, is an Orthodox Jew. One of my donors is a born-again Christian. One of my donors is an atheist. So I think I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah, that's balance right there.
Yeah.
And when it comes to street
epistemology,
thank you for that.
Yeah.
I imagine in the practice of that, you could have much more civil conversations with Christians than you would with perhaps somebody from a woke ideology.
Woke people in general won't do it, but we have some videos on our channel. Like, if you go to Peter Boghossian, Boghossian, you can see those on YouTube. They're all free to watch. Yep. And some of those people some woke people will and some won't, but the tensions rise very quickly on those. And so part of the reason that I'm here is to help people have conversations across divides.
Yeah.
There's no reason, because look, if you don't do that, then the necessary condition is violence. Like, that's what happens. And I don't want to live in Iraq 20 years ago. I don't think you do either. I'll speak for you and say you don't.
I'm good with that. Yeah.
So
having those impossible conversations. I mean, this is the title of another of your books. How we respectfully engage with people with different worldviews.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the person who's got a broken relationship with his daughter.
Yeah.
That's heartbreaking stuff.
It is.
And I know there'll be people listening to this at the moment that are going, where do I even start? I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. He's this family member that I love, and yet I can't even talk to them about the stuff that they believe.
Yeah.
How do we start those conversations without losing the relationship and winning the argument?
That's a great question. So, assuming it's in your family, so you already have some kind of rapport, the most important thing to do in those is to just genuinely listen. Yeah. And many people think that they're listening, but they're not actually listening. And so there are many things you can do. You can repeat, this is from Rappaport's rules, you can repeat back to someone what you thought you heard. And what you're looking for, ideally you're looking for, that's right. Those two words, that's right. Yep. So that comes from the literature in hostage negotiations. But even if someone says, yeah, that's good. And so then you can use these things called minimal encouragers. When someone says something to you, you repeat the last few words back to let them know that you're just sincerely listening. And so part of the problem is that we just communicate messages. We think, oh, if this person had this body of evidence, they'd just believe this. Or if they had this data point, all of a sudden magically. Well, no, I mean, obviously that's not true. Like, that's just silly to even think that. So you need a different posture, if you will. You need a different way to approach those conversations. But if someone's listening to this and they're stuck with a family member, the most important thing is to just listen and figure out what they believe and figure out why they believe it. And so then there are other things that you can do. You know, that alone is like a lifetime project. But you can ask questions like, what should I do if I believe this? What is a mistake in my reasoning? For your reasoning, what would it take to change your mind? That's probably the most important question anybody could ever ask, because it's about God or not God or wokeism. Someone believes something. Oh, someone's born in the wrong body. Oh, well, what would it take for you to change your mind? What? And don't put in the answer for them. Don't say, well, what about the stories of detransitioners? Because then you're giving a message. So then you want to listen to what they say and see if that's a reasonable thing.
And instead of getting to that situation where we're in opposite corners yelling slogans at each other.
Yeah, first of all, no one should be yelling. There should be more listening. And most of the time, you realize, this is one of the things that, again, we're the same age, 58. One of the things that I've learned, we go around the world with they're literal physical mats, and we put them on the ground, and we're from strongly agree, slightly agree, neutral, and on the other side. And we'll ask people literally every conceivable thing you could think about, usually controversial, not always, like sometimes we ask about aliens and stuff, but, every conceivable thing you could think of. And from publishing in this, researching this, reading this, I can tell you something that if you really think about it, I think it may be an aha moment. People don't stand on the mats they stand. In other words, they don't have the position that they agree on something because they have the evidence for it. They'll stand where they stand, or they'll have the conviction or the strength of belief because that's where they believe they should stand. So there's a moral component to what people believe.
It's part of that tribe that they belong to, that sense of belonging again.
That's 100%.
Where would other people that I know and like stand on this? I'll stand with them.
I want to be a good person. Good people believe this. I believe this. My community believes this. I believe this. I'm with my community. It's like you can create those syllogisms, but that's the basic idea. Anytime you talk about something dealing with identity, those become much more difficult. Paul Graham on Twitter has this great thing. If you can't think clearly because of an identity marker, like you're white, then you should just stop making things part of your identity, because it prevents you from thinking clearly about things. Oh, being a Muslim is part of my identity. Okay, well, once you make it part of your identity, then criticizing that is criticizing your identity. And so that's a problem, but it's also why we need to have free speech. And if you're looking for just a quick rule of thumb, like this is the rule that I use. as long as it's not an immutable characteristic, it's up for grabs.
Yeah.
So like I can't criticize you because of, I don't know, your vision isn't perfect.
Yeah. I wear glasses.
You have glasses, right? So that's because what's the point of criticizing you if you can't fix it?
Yeah.
Right. So if it's an immutable property of a person, if someone's short, why would you criticize them for being that's just mean.
That's bullying.
But it's just you're bullying someone. But if all ideas should be subject to criticism.
Some wonderful food for thought. I could have this conversation all day, Peter. It's really nice to chat with you.
Man.
Thank you for your time. Of course, we've only just touched the surface on this. I would encourage people to go deeper into this, especially if they've got perhaps some awkward conversations with family over Christmas. Speaking tonight for the Free Speech Union, details available at fsu.nz. Peter, thanks so much for joining us today.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.